Today, I'm delighted to be speaking with Andrew Chalfen, an artist and musician whose work explores patterns, rhythms, and psychological states, though abstract and mixed media forms. His art invites viewers into layered experiences that balance complexity and meditation. Andrew, thank you so much for joining me today. I'd love to begin by asking about the themes that often appear in your work.
Right.
So, your pieces often allude to aerial views, cartography, architecture, musical notation, and urban densities, but you've said that you're not literally depicting them. How do these references emerge in your abstract and mixed media works?
Well, all those things you mentioned, I've been interested in my whole life, even back when I was a kid. Um, and I noticed even when I was young that abstract geometric art often felt like those things that you just mentioned. Uh, when I was younger, I used to just draw imaginary maps of cities and ski resorts and train stations and things like that. And I was always fascinated by aerial views of those things. Um, I'm self-taught, so I just started iterating upon those themes gradually over time, and they seem to emerge in my artwork. I gravitate towards certain kinds of forms, uh, and I just sort of riff on them.
Mm-hmm. That's fascinating to hear about how you've always been interested in art and how your childhood still influences your artwork. And you've all often described your work as a process journey that mirrors songwriting, representing motives, subtle variations, randomness, and intentionality. Could you walk us through how a work comes together from initial idea to a finished piece?
Sure. Well, let me talk briefly about music. Music is a little more linear. I'm a songwriter as well, and so uh, a finished piece of music happens over time, whereas when you're looking at a piece of art, at least a piece of static art, um, it's more sort of holistic. You take it in all at once. Um, but the processes of creating them are very similar in that I'm trying to hone in on various, like you said, motifs, or I think of them in pop music terms, in terms of riffs and hooks, like earworms. But in case of art, it's eye worms, basically, things that like grab you and make you and are really sticky. Um, and so I take a handful of those elements, same with my songwriting in the art, and then I mass them together. I try not to have too many elements because that makes the piece too messy or not a cohesive whole. I find restrictions are quite important when working with like theme and variation. Um, an example of that is my painted stick work, and I'm going to share some of that with you right now. Um, this piece is not in the show, but it is representative of one of the pieces that is in the show. I think there's a 4-foot version of it in the show, one of the dazzle ships. And you can see it's a 3D piece of
Wow.
mass painted sticks. So, excuse me, my cat is eating her
Of course.
lunch. Um, each stick, I create sort of each stick individually, not thinking about all the other sticks that it's going to go with. I'm just cranking them out like a little stick factory, and I want each stick to sort of be a standalone piece of art or like a little visual haiku or some little visual poem. And
Mhm.
then the generative part of the art is when I start massing them together and gluing them down and putting them in different configurations. And I know generally the piece is going to have a background and have a masked painted collection of painted sticks, but I don't know specifically how the works are going to come out. And that for me is part of the joy of creating these.
That's interesting to see. I didn't know that it had a 3D element in it. I just thought it's 2D, but
It's when I'm submitting them to open calls, usually they get the front view, and
mm,
if they're not looking closely, they'll think it's a 2D work. As a matter of fact, I've gotten pieces accepted into works, into shows, and they arrive, and the curator's always surprised that it's 3D.
No, that's a really interesting way to depict like mixing 2D media and a 3D media, and the detailing is just amazing. I can't wait to see it in person. And now, moving forward, like how I viewed your work, I would say many viewers feel that they feel overwhelmed at first and then absorbed by your intricate patterns, almost like entering a meditative state. Is that an experience you intend to cultivate? How do you hope people engage with your work?
Well, it's an experience I find is true for myself. I don't intentionally try to overwhelm people. I had a friend look at one of my earlier pieces, which was a lot of masked shapes and no negative space. Everything just spilled out over the edges. And she felt overwhelmed, like overstimulated by the piece. But I find if that's an initial reaction, that's fine. But if you keep looking at it, you start to get absorbed in the details of the piece. And that's akin to, and then when you're looking at the details and looking at some of the smaller things going on the micro level, you're not thinking about the overwhelmed part. And that's sort of like a meditation practice of getting rid of your monkey mind,
Mm-hmm.
where you have all these thoughts happening, all this big jumble, but then through meditation, you reach a calmer state where you're more focused. And so that's a bit of what I'm trying to do with my art. So you have this big, overwhelming, possibly psychedelic thing, and then you get into it, and then you sort of notice some of the other details, like some of the urban forms, or that it looks like musical notation, or that different kinds of pixelations happen here and there.
Okay, that's nice. Do you think your work has kind of evolved from when you started till now? Like, is there something that you've changed about it?
Well, sure. I think that I'm still interested in densities, but I've also figured out that negative space is kind of important, or that spaces that have more of a background to them are important to have in the piece, and to foreground certain other things. I still do occasionally do pieces that everything spills out and it's this big sea universe of shape and color, but I'm trying to work a certain kind of lightness into my work now.
That's nice to hear about. Do you think your work is going to keep evolving and even after this exhibition, whether it be like conceptually or like materially?
Oh, I sure hope so, because I get bored easily. I don't want to do the same thing over and over again. I know some artists are happy doing that, but after a couple iterating on a couple things, I tend to want to do not something opposite, but sometimes I'll do a black and white piece after I've done a lot of color work. Um, or the 3D work was a reaction to thinking this 2D stuff is cool, but what if it's suggesting a 3D-ness? So what if I actually tried to literally make things 3D? And right now I'm sort of experimenting more with collage and making individual. I mean, to a certain extent, my stick pieces are collage like, but using things other than sticks like paper and found objects. And so I'm thinking in those terms right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, all your pieces are like just beautiful and just so different from what you normally see, and especially how you've like mixed the 2D aspect of it with the 3D aspect. And sometimes it's just like really hard to achieve, but I think you've achieved that beautifully.
Oh,
And talking about your pieces, my absolute favorite one from your submissions has to be like 100 good ideas. It suggests both abundance and maybe a bit of irony.
mhm.
So, was this title like born from a burst of creativity, or does it comment on the excess of ideas in contemporary culture?
um, I'm open to that interpretation, but that's not what I was thinking when I titled it. My titles I usually stare at a finished piece and try to get at the essence or the feeling that the piece is emitting to me at least. And I tried to be a little witty about it, because a title is I think is almost important as some of the things that happen in the piece. It's almost like an earworm, a riff, a hook as well, something that you want to latch onto. And so that the more sort of hooky I can be about the title, the better. The thing with that piece is it happened because of a random serendipity. Um, I had been I paint in acrylics. They dry pretty quickly, and I go from paint tube to paint tube or paint can to paint can pretty quickly, and I discard whatever is left over on my brush after I painted something on a palette. And I noticed a lot of paint was piling up on my palette, and I thought, oh, this is sort of wasteful. And then when I peeled the paint off the palette, it was nice and shiny from the surface of the palette, and I thought, okay, well, that's cool. That's a neat effect. What if I standardize that slightly? So I got a candy tray, a silicone candy tray, and I used that as my paint palette. And so when I filled each of the little candy molds up with paint, I filled them with epoxy resin. And once that hardened, let me show you. This is the paint tray. This is a completed paint tray, which has been filled with epoxy. Once they harden, I can pop them out like little candies or pieces of jewelry or whatever you want to think of them as. And they're like little pieces of unintentional art.
Mm-hmm.
Those are all from discards of paint off of a brush. And each one is different, although they're all the same shape and they all have, acrylic paint on them. So I called it 100 good ideas because they're all sort of little individual pieces of art. And so I put them with like a cloud background. So it's almost like the Platonic idea of little pieces of art floating in space.
Yeah, that's really creative working with resin and mixing it with something that people consider wasteful and converting it into art. It's something different.
Right. Well, yeah, it's recycled paint, although I'm using a whole lot of resin. So that's not necessarily recycled as well. So, I can say some of it's recycled, but it's not really a recycling project.
Well, it's creating good work. So,
Yeah.
uh, considering the topic of titles, many of your titles suggest sound, structure, or like collective experience. How important is titling in helping your viewers enter into your abstract works?
Oh, like I was saying, titles are like hooks. They're like riffs. Um, and they if a good title can bring a viewer into the piece. If it's a very obscure title, sometimes maybe the viewer will consider it and maybe think about, ponder it, like, wonder what it's about. But I find that sometimes it's a little better to not be obvious, but to be a little more directional with the titles.
That makes sense considering the title can change how you see a particular work. And
Right.
yeah. So, moving on from that, like, has working with Alpha encouraged you to think about your art differently or how it's presented, whether through scale or installation?
Well, my interactions with Alpha have been limited to the open call submission and acceptance and this interview. So I can't really speak to that because I haven't been to the gallery space yet. I'm sure I'll have more to say about that when I get to the gallery.
Yeah,
I'm
we
curious to see what the curator has selected because you present them with a number of options and they pick a few, and I'm always surprised about what they select.
yeah. Yeah, we are very excited to meet you in person if you would be able to make it to the
I
reception.
am looking forward to it.
Yeah. So finally, what has it been like preparing for this exhibition compared to the others that you've done? Has the gallery context shaped your selection of works?
Um, I usually try to follow the open call prompt pretty closely because that improves one's chances of getting selected. Um, I think in terms of a group show, the pieces were already completed, the pieces that I submitted. If it was a solo show, I'd probably be hustling to complete a number of new works for the show. Um, but this is a group show, so everything was done.
Do you think the pressure is a bit less because it's a group?
Oh, for sure, yeah. But it's a little less. I mean, it's exciting, but it's nothing quite like a solo show, or as nerve wracking as a solo show because it's just you, so you're the only one being judged.
No, I'm sure your work is just amazing. So, and I'm sure everyone is gonna love seeing them.
Well, thank you.
And thank you so much for sharing your insights with us today. It's been wonderful to hear about your creative process, the role of titling and themes, and just the vision behind your work. We are thrilled to feature you in our upcoming exhibition Between Stillness and Surge here at Alfa Art Gallery, running from October 27, 2025 to January 9th, 2026. I wish you the great rest of your day.
Oh, thank you. This has been a pleasure.
Thank you.